Hello again, students. Today I'm going to go over a brief reading. Again, it's similar to the reading that is also in the site, only as we go through these chapters more and more deeper into the semester, many of the pictures are also in this particular document. The Arabs were a Semitic-speaking people of Southwest Asia. They're mentioned in many Greek sources in the 400s, the 600 before Common Era. And the historian Herodotus had applied the name Arab to the entire peninsula. The Romans ruled over the Bedouin Arabs, who were a nomadic people. And this was a very patrilineal society, ruled by a council of elders called the Majlis. The Arabs of pre-Islamic times were polytheistic, and a massive black meteorite housed in the sacred shrine called the Kaaba in the commercial city of Mecca had come to possess especially sacred qualities. As we get into more modern times, in the Common Era, the importance of the Arabian Peninsula began to increase. There's constant warfare between the Persians and the Byzantines, and this is important because this will later be reflected in the schism that will happen in Islam between Shiites and Sunni Muslims. And today, Iran, which is basically ancient Persia, are largely of the Shiite faith, whereas more Western Arabs, as you get closer to the Mediterranean, tend to be more Sunni. And those are the two major branches of Islam, which was founded by Muhammad, who was orphaned at age 6. He became a caravan manager and he married a rich widow, Khadijah, who became his employer. Dissatisfied with his life, he retreated to the hills where he encountered the angel Gabriel. And he believes now that just like Moses and Jesus, a special revelation was given to him. And in his dictations to scribes, this became the Quran, or recitation, a Muslim holy book. And the faith, Islam, means submission to Allah. And Muslims are practitioners of Islam, one who has submitted. Like Christians and Jews are also a Semitic people, Muslims are people of the book. They are believers in a faith based on Scripture. These beliefs got him into trouble at the time. After 3 years, he only had about 30 followers. So in 622, he left Mecca for Medina, also known as Yathrib, on a flight known today as the Hijra or the Hijra. And this is part of the pillars of faith of Muslims also. You need to make this pilgrimage once in your life. He failed to convert the community there, but he did recruit many Bedouins, or the nomadic peoples, and he returned with an army and he conquered Mecca in 630. He declared the Kaaba a sacred shrine. He destroyed all other idols. This is very important in the Islamic faith. Idolatry is a big no-no. And basically, there are 5 big teachings of Muhammad that you need to be familiar with. There is one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. You need to pray 5 times a day facing east or facing Mecca. During the holy month of Ramadan, which changes every year, it's not the same time every year, you must fast during daylight hours. You do not eat while the sun is out. You must give alms to the poor or try to do some sort of charitable works. And as I mentioned, once in your lifetime, you need to make the Hajj to the holy city of Mecca. You need to try to do this. Muslim scholars drew up a law code after the death of Muhammad, which was problematic, as we'll see, because there is no clear line of succession in terms of who is the real arbiter of the faith. So the Sharia law came to be that sort of guide, a set of prescriptions for daily life. There are many things that are forbidden to Muslims. You're not supposed to gamble, eat pork, drink alcohol, or engage in dishonest behavior. There are heavily regulated sexual mores. Contacts between unmarried men and women is discouraged. Marriages should be arranged. Polygyny is permitted where it is legal. where this is illegal in Western society, it's called polygamy. Muslims could have more than one wife. Why does this undergo such a huge expansion? Abu Bakr became the immediate successor to Muhammad, and it was his father-in-law. And he came to be called a caliph, or successor. And they are also religious leaders in terms of being political as well as religious in their direction for society. After unification, Arabs began directing the same energy they used against each other to their neighbors. The Byzantines and the Sassanian empires were the first to feel Arab zeal. Syria is conquered by 650. There are many different accounts for why there was such rapid expansion, but here are some possible solutions or answers to that question. They had a lot of outstanding military leaders. The cavalry was highly motivated, and a big motivation for the soldiers was that it was believed that if you die in battle, you are guaranteed a place in paradise. And once they originally conquered an area, they're very tolerant. If you do not want to convert to Islam, you are required to pay a tax so that you will be able to get out of military service. And many of the areas that were conquered preferred this new faith, which in the eyes of Allah, everyone is equal. The Umayyads were another particular dynasty. Ali was the son-in-law of Muhammad, and he was not allowed to succeed to the top caliphate position. Finally, he is selected, and unfortunately in 661 Common Era, he was assassinated. And his rival, probably the killer, took over. And then where the controversy, which goes to this day, is he makes his family the hereditary leaders, and they are the Umayyads. They are attacking both ends of the Mediterranean Sea at this time. They take over Egypt, North Africa, the Berbers were conquered, the Iberian Peninsula, which is where Spain is, and Andalusia will become a very famous Muslim learning center in Spain. Just about half of Spain was under control of the Muslims for many, many years. The most farthest advance into Europe was stopped at the Battle of Tours by French forces under Charles Martel. Charles Martel defeated the Moors at the Battle of Tours, 732. An attack on Constantinople failed, mainly because of Archimedes and some of his inventions. They were able to fight them off with missiles of the time that mixed sulfur and quicklime, which was called Greek fire. Very successful weapon. They did conquer Mesopotamia, the Tigris-Euphrates area, and Persia. In Iraq, there was a revolt against the Umayyad rule in 680. And Hussein, Ali's second son, disputed the legitimacy of that dynasty, and he incited supporters to revolt. And as time went on, followers of Hussein came to be called Shiites, followers of Ali. And these are the two basic branches to this day. The Sunni or Orthodox, the followers of the original Caliph Abu Bakr, and the Shiites or Shia branch, followers of Hussein. The Abbasids are another Muslim empire dynasty. They tried to break down the distinction between Arab and non-Arab Muslims, but only Muslims could hold important offices. Intermarriage between Arabs and non-Arabs is not permitted. In North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean, Muslim converts began to consider themselves Arab, and a new capital was eventually built at Baghdad, where Persian influence begins. And the Abbasid rule under that caliph is described as a golden age. His son was a very learned man. He founded that astronomical observatory, began translating Greek works, and Baghdad becomes a huge commercial market that extended into Europe, Central Asia, and Africa. The caliph will eventually not attend meetings of the council. He'll sit behind a screen, and he will communicate only with the vizier, the prime minister, who will then relay the divine will to the council. And this becomes a more and more elaborate and, in some sense, not Muslim way of ruling, because it is kind of too elaborate, closer to idolatry. There's corruption that results after Harun's death, and you can see the Hashemite clan started to receive. This is another smaller branch of Islam that's still around today as well, mostly in Saudi Arabia. All of these different codes are being violated. And the Tigris and Euphrates are beginning to fill up after all these centuries of farming. The Islamic Empire fragments in the 900s. Morocco became independent. The Fatimids established the Shiite dynasty in Egypt. And really the only thing that's holding this world together by about the 10th century is the common language and the Quran, Bible. The Seljuk Turks were a nomadic people from Central Asia who converted. And the Turks will capture Baghdad. And they will start using the term sultan, which is another term for ruler. And he will be the head person of these particular dynasties or caliphates. The Seljuk Turks will exert military pressure on other areas. They will conquer the Byzantines at Manzikert. This is a very famous battle in 1071. And that gives them the control of what is eastern Turkey today. And when this happened, this begins the Crusades, because now they are seeking help from the West to try to fight against these Muslim barbarians, as they were called. The Turks revived Islamic law. They restored prosperity. But the Persians are now resenting this Turkish rule as a betrayal of the true faith of Islam. One of the most feared enemies of the Seljuks were the assassins or guardians who terrorized officials from their base in the mountains south of the Caspian Sea. The Crusades. Emperor Alexius asks for help from the Christian states. He said this is why tensions arose. So from 1096 through the 13th century, there are multiple crusades by Christian forces attempting to liberate this area that was Christian at one time. Saladin was a very famous sultan who established control over Egypt and Syria. And he conquered Jerusalem in 1187. And he's a good ruler. But eventually the Christian forces will regroup again. But they could never really get control for any significant period of time, only about 100 years before the Muslims took control again. The big thing to remember about the importance for us today of the Crusades is that it created a distrust towards Christians by Muslims that's really never gone away. Far more important in Middle Eastern history are the Mongols, who in the 1200s conquered most of the known world. And more on that in chapter 10. Here's some more tactics of the Muslims. They wiped places out. They were nasty soldiers, very effective, because they razed and destroyed everything. And that's why many Christians view them as barbaric. The Anatolia Peninsula is slowly taken control of by the new center of power, the Ottoman Turks. And finally in 1453, remember this fact, Mehmet II ends the Byzantine Empire by conquering Constantinople. Andalusia was a Muslim outpost, as mentioned earlier. Very, very famous center of learning. Andalusia flourished as an artistic and intellectual center It supported artists and writers, and it gave rise to 3 world-class cities, Cordoba, Seville, and Toledo. And intellectual leaders from all over the Islamic world converged on these cities. They were practitioners of tolerance for a time. Jews and Christians and Muslims all got along because of the policy of convivencia. But, as with all these old dynasties and empires, they rise and they fall. The Christian kingdoms began to want to recapture Spain, and then you have King Alfonso taking Toledo in that year. You have the Almoravids of Morocco helping to defeat the Castilian forces in 1086. They are not very tolerant people, as most of these Christians who reconquer areas are not. This is when Jews also begin to be persecuted in Spain, and many of them will flee. 1215, there is a call for another crusade to destroy Muslim rule in southern Spain, and they slowly advanced and conquered those areas. Finally, in the next 200 years, only Granada, this mountain hilltop forest, will be the only thing that remains. You must remember that the Muslim religion is also political. And that is a big difference between Judaism and Christianity. It's not just a spiritual faith. It is also one that needs to be consulted on all areas of life. Politics, economics, behavior, civil and criminal law, and social ethics. And if it's not in the Quran, you can find answers in the Hadith or the Sharia law. Eventually, what this comes to be practiced as is that it will be subject to the will of the imam, or the religious leader, and they're going to end up telling folks what it is they should and should not be doing. It's an autocratic system, authoritarian. While Europe was undergoing the Black Death and the Plague, this was the most prosperous area in the world, because it is the crossroads of East Asia and Europe. And these are famous areas and some of the things that were traded across these areas. Marrakesh is a very famous trade center. The mosque is the Islamic church, and it's usually the most impressive building within a city. It is hierarchical. There was slavery, even though, according to the Quran, everyone is equal. Philosophy and science was prized, and we can thank the Arabs for storing many of the key works of Aristotle and Plato, which were later translated again into Latin and brought into Europe. Justinian, when the Byzantines will revive for a time, more on that in a later chapter, he closes that Platonic Academy. And many of the scholars took their works and all of these other Greco-Roman documents with them to Baghdad and later these other areas. This was helped by the arrival of paper invented by the Han Dynasty from China. Ibn Sina is a very famous Muslim philosopher. He was also a believer in natural law and human reason. And in mathematics, the big thing that was adopted was the use of zero and the founding of the discipline of algebra. We can thank the Arabs for their numerals, otherwise we'd still be using Roman numerals. And these are some famous pieces of literature as well. The geometric orientation of their art is what it's very famous for. Dome of the Rock is a very famous Mosque. Minaret towers are where the callers to go to prayer will sound the cry, the muezzin. And that is it, just about, for this video. The Mosque of Cordoba is in that, and there's a picture of Alhambra in Granada. That's it.